Well, hello and welcome to Business Disability Forum's weekly COVID-19 webinar, which we are offering as a free resource to everyone during this time. I'm Diane Lightfoot and I'm Chief Executive of Business Disability Forum. I'm delighted to be your host for today, and as you can probably tell from the beginning, this is my first time of hosting a webinar, so I'm very pleased to say that I have expert backup in the shape of a couple of colleagues who can help me. Closed captions are available for today's meeting provided by MyClearText, and you can choose this, and it also says this on the screen, by clicking the closed captions button at the bottom of your screen, which is next to the chat option. If you need to adjust the caption size, then click on the arrow next to Stop Start Video, choose Video Settings and click on Accessibility. Now, our subject this morning is one that we suspect and hope will resonate with many. We had 50 people signed up to this webinar, which indicates it probably does, which is how to juggle caring responsibilities and working from home in this unprecedented situation. It's been a huge shift for most of us to move to remote working, but for those who have to care for loved ones and homeschool the kids, it really is a daunting prospect. So I am delighted to be joined by Julian John from Delsion, who will be sharing some of his experiences and tips on how to manage work, care, and your own well-being, and perhaps, dare I say, stay relatively sane at this very difficult time. So, hello, welcome, Julian.
Hello, and thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be part of the conversation.
Well, it's fabulous to have you, and I always enjoy a chat with you, Julian, so I suspect that our guests are in for a treat. So, to start with, can you just tell us a bit about you and what you do?
I run a company called Delsion. We're a people and development consultancy. And the majority of work we do is supporting organisations to be more inclusive, specifically around either disability or as inclusion as a whole. And that's on the basis of starting the business after becoming disabled myself.
And I think you're already very familiar with working from home. So generally, in your experience, what are some of the challenges, and what are some of your tips?
Well, it's interesting because I started the business as part of my recovery, part of my pathway back into work. So I started from a bedroom, from working from home. And I've then moved on. I've got my own offices down in Swansea where we're based, which I can't access at the moment. And I suppose the interesting piece that I discovered was actually before all the current situation. I started doing some lecturing work for a university, doing some human resources, lecturing around different aspects of inclusion. And they asked me, as part of that, I had to go and work for them. And it was the first time that I'd sort of stepped out of the environment that I created for myself and started to realise that I'd put in everything in place around me, which I actually needed. And when I had to change that environment, that I hadn't taken the things that I needed with me. And that's, I suppose, is the key learning that sits around that. It's, if you think of the social model of disability, it is thinking, well, what are the barriers that exist? So, for example, I have a team that work around me, but a lot of that is to fit in with my needs. A support worker that comes into the office and we work very closely together. So what's changed around there? So when I've now I'm back in the bedroom again through all of this, just been able to rescue one spine and a stormtrooper helmet.
We all need a stormtrooper helmet.
Yeah, and I got a little folding table, and I thought I had everything set up. And I sat there and I suddenly realised I forgot my printer from the office. And because I can't use a screen for long periods of time, I print off everything. Mm-hmm. So it's taking that time to understand what you actually need on a daily basis that you tend to rely on. That's one of the key things that I've learned.
Yeah, and I saw a great article that Nancy Doyle, who I'm sure many people will be familiar with, of Genius Within, that she wrote for Forbes magazine this week, and it basically said that because of the pandemic and the situation we're all in, she said it's proven the social model of disability, because we're all now effectively disabled in all sorts of different ways. It's well worth a read. But so you've obviously been working from home a long time. You've got this good setup, but now you have the children at home, and you have the caring responsibilities, and it sounds like probably that nice slick setup that you had going with your stormtrooper has maybe been a bit disrupted.
Yeah, and it goes back to when we first started talking about doing this webinar, and it's like, well, you said something around care, and it's like, well, we need to find someone who spends time caring for me, because I not tend to view myself in that caring position. But as I said, I'm disabled through an acquired brain injury. I've got 2 small children, a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old. My 7-year-old is autistic. My 8-year-old has got her own challenges with regards to disability, around mobility and some learning skills. We've all, by the looks of things, had exposure to the virus, so we were all ill for a period of time. My wife has been quite unwell for an extended period of time. She's developed pneumonia. And suddenly the whole world changed. And there was me trying to plow on as I normally do, with all these additional things to try and put on place, and try and run a business alongside. And I think that's the time you take stock and just try and understand what the priorities are, and what you need to do to adjust around them.
I'm slightly cheating asking you this, because I saw it on Twitter, but do tell us about that amazing sensory tent that you created. Well,
as I said, my son's autistic, and what he likes is regularity. He likes uniform things. He likes things that happen at a certain time. He likes that sits around him. And one of the areas that we take him to is a play zone play area, of which has a sensory room. And we've noticed he's struggling a little bit with all the changes that are going on, certainly with his mum being ill as well. So we went out and we got a sensory tent, and we've just filled it full of all the sensory items that he's used to, just so it's under the stairs. So he's a little bit like Harry Potter. But he can go in there to his heart, and my daughter does as well, just to take that time out. But it's something which he can relate back to. One of the other things is, when my wife was particularly ill, he didn't want to sleep in there on his own. So I was camping downstairs with him for a week, just to create that sort of fun element of sleeping on a deflated mattress on a carpet. So those are the things we've tried to put into place.
And I'll take your word for it about sleeping on a deflated mattress being fun. I can remember doing that. But there is a lot of pressure, isn't there? I mean, generally on parents who are trying to, well, whether you've got a job or not, in trying to do the homeschooling side of things. And for you, layering on that extra dimension of your son having autism, for example. So what sort of advice do you have around that homeschooling piece? I mean, anecdotally, I know a lot of people who are really stressed about that and really beating themselves up about it.
I heard a great quote the other day. Don't pretend to be a teacher, be a parent. And I think that's a really key bit of information that I took on board, because I tried to replicate the whole school element, and it doesn't work. For me, because we run a people and development consultancy, because my background is training, learning, development, for me, learning is learning. It doesn't have to be the maths lesson that takes place at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. And the other thing that I've learned is that I haven't got that much experience of being in school, but my kids have. So we sit down and talk to them and say, right, what do you do? So my little boy, we have to take the register every day, because that's something that he feels comfortable in doing. So I have to stand there and read out 2 names.
Quite a short register.
Yeah, and if I don't, but then the other things, so we do PE, whether that be playing football out the back. They do something in school called the Daily Mile. So they do 10 laps outside around the house. obviously my daughter's got some mobility restrictions, so she does one, and then she's got a little seat which we both sit on, just watching my son get all his energy out of him as he goes. I'm trying to build him up to 100 laps. So those are the things that we sort of try, but to put in place. But as you said, to take the pressure off. There's a lot more flexibility around what we can do to support them, and there's a huge amount of resources available out there as well.
There are, and I'm going to ask you about those just in a second. But just a reminder for those who are joining this webinar, if you do have questions for Julian, we're going to leave a good chunk of time at the end so that you can ask those. But if you want to put them on the chat, be thinking about them now, and or put them on the chat as you think of them. We'll pick them up towards the end. So do that. So yes, resources, Julian. What are the resources that you would recommend or that you personally find helpful?
I came up with an idea of taking the children on the world cruise, and picking a destination every day. Right. And going on YouTube to try and do a little bit of videos around what that place is like, and if we can copy it with food in some way. We're very fortunate. We've got the schools provided all a load of different areas, and it's picking what the children enjoy doing. So my son loves dinosaurs, so we do a lot of work around dinosaurs. We do things like top trumps, the playing cards. We find those really useful. I've got this. So that's a pirate hat.
That is a pirate hat.
During craft yesterday. So the children were playing pirates. And because yesterday was my work day, because I had a lot of work to do, I sat in my office with that all day to be part of it, so the children could come and check to make sure I was wearing my pirate hat.
For anyone who can't see the screen, Julian is showing us a rather natty purple pirate hat with a little skull and crossbones on it, and the skull has even got a little yellow bandana.
Bandana made out of foam.
Yeah, there is no detail has been overlooked here.
Nearly forgot to take it off for a video call yesterday, but I saved the day at the last minute.
Although interesting you say that, because one of the things, and this is not specifically about carers, that conversations I've been having about working in this pandemic mean that people are being much more human, and we're seeing, like, even now we're seeing inside each other's houses, we're seeing people being less informal, less formal, more informal. There is that much more blurring between kind of work and home personas, if you like. And I can't imagine that 3 months ago you'd have walked into a meeting, Julian, in Swansea with your pirate hat on, but actually it's sort of become okay. So what do you think are some of the kind of positives about this situation, and what would you like us to keep, to hold on to when this is all over? I will ask you some more things about caring.
Yeah, I think it relates back to disability to a certain degree, that where the conversations that take place in the workplace around disability between individuals are different to the conversations that take place at home or in more social settings, just because it tends to be left at the doorstep because there's a different activity which takes place within an organisation. And I think it's very much along the lines with caring responsibilities or whatever we do. And I think the organisational realisation that things actually happen outside of the workplace is absolutely key. I think there'll be people working at home who, when asked to do the 3-hour commute to get back into work, will start challenging and understanding why that needs to be when we have so much accessibility and flexibility at present. So those, for everything to take forward, I think it is the accessibility, the flexibility, the creativity, the different skill sets that are actually currently in the workplace at the moment, and recognising those and being able to capture those and take them forward. I think that's the biggest thing I wanted to stay the same.
Yeah, definitely. And I really hope that a legacy of this will be that understanding and recognition of different ways of working, and appreciation that you don't have to be in the office 9 till 5 and you can still be productive, and that the things that some employers, I'm sure not our members, who are generally very committed to including disabled people in their workforce and as consumers, but the kind of knee-jerk reaction, which is actually this is too difficult, this is too wacky, we don't have people working from home, we don't do flex, we don't do this, that now they can't say that because actually we've all had to adapt to it really quickly and proven that it works. That said, there is something about separation between work and home. And the usual advice about having maybe set working hours or creating separate working spaces and separation full stop is really hard when you're suddenly working from home, but probably nigh on impossible when you're also juggling caring responsibilities. So if you are working very flexibly and if you are juggling these different things, for you, Julian, how can you maybe still create that sense of separation and work-life balance?
I've had a number of conversations with people that we work with and just people I know within different positions in organisations who are really struggling with the concept of used to working longer hours anyway for the roles that they're in, where everything starts merging into one. And we have to make these defined lines of understanding of what we're actually doing within a day. So your working day may have gone from 9 hours to 6 hours, but your extra responsibility could easily be another 10 hours on top of that. For me, it's taking that time to recognize what our outputs are. And being able to, just because and it's the same with phones and everyone being linked to their phones, because we have access to things doesn't mean we have to access it. For various different reasons around well-being, we have to take the time to be able to say, no, I'm switching my phone off at this time. I'm stopping work at this time. And within this environment, certainly for myself, creating time for me that sits within all that to be able to better support the people around me. We talk a lot within organisations about presenteeism. Mm-hmm. This is where the merging lines will start to affect it. So you do need to be present at home as a father, as well as be present running a business. And we need to be quite strict on ourselves to look at what are we doing? What is our screen time? How many meetings are we having? And for me, a lot of sits around, there's a couple of things that sits around having levers. What helps us? What supports us? What's going to make things easier for us? And understanding the outputs that we have, are they necessary for this moment in time? Just because we've always done something, does that mean we always have to keep doing it? Just because we've always done something at 9 o'clock in the morning. We need that flexibility, but we need to understand what we're actually doing around there. I sit down, I worked, I said, my career is within retail. And I always remember someone telling me, sit down in the day, at the end of the day, reflect, where have I added value? And I do that consistently to say, right, what did I do today? What could I have done better? Yesterday was an example. We had 2 online therapy sessions for the children, both at the same time, both at 12 o'clock. Carnage. Not going to happen again. Because I've got, my son wants me there, my daughter wants, for all different reasons. Doesn't work. And then you look back at why do we allow that to happen? And exactly the same as why have we been dictated to have 10 Zoom meetings in the course of a day? So we need to be a little bit more focused in a different environment to understand that at 5 o'clock, whatever it may be, the doors won't shut and we won't commute home, and say, well, that's our time now. Yeah.
And I think there's definitely something about employers recognizing that. And I think it was something that came up in last week's webinar that was about remote working. And the guests, Oren and Tim, were speaking about understanding the privilege that many people in a senior leadership position might have. So recognizing that perhaps not all your workforce has got the luxury of a dedicated, perfectly set up home working space without any interruptions. I mean, I haven't. I'm fully expecting the dog to kind of walk through at some point. But taking that to an opposite extreme, that people might be in a shared house, they might be working out of their bedroom, they might be doing all sorts of things. And just having that empathy and awareness to understand that it might not be easy for people and that they may have loads of other things they're juggling going on, and just taking that moment to think, my experience may not be my employees' experience. So what, in terms of positive things, what can employers do to support carers at this time? And one of the reasons for having this webinar is that we haven't traditionally done a lot around carers as opposed to disabled employees and consumers, but it's actually a topic that has really started to come up the agenda. So it seemed like a really good opportunity to kind of test the waters and interest. So what would your advice be to employers, Julian?
interesting, because as I said, I until reflection, I didn't class myself as someone who had that much care and responsibilities. And on looking back, I probably do. One of the key things, and some of the stuff that I'm quite passionate about, is where we look at inclusion within organisations, that we try and take it out of its silos as such. And the fundamental piece that sits around that is that within organisations, we treat people as individuals. We understand exactly what their needs are at a specific time, and able to support people around that. And I talk about having the knowledge, empathy, and engagement around that. And it's very much organisations realising what they are trying to do at this moment. Apologies. It's what is that strategic narrative that sits in organisations? What are we trying to do? It's very clear what the NHS is trying to do at this time. If you are an organisation either who's not doing as much work, or is diversifying, who's doing a lot more work, how have we communicated what we do down to individuals? And how have we then supported them to be able to do that? So it goes back to this piece that if we're trying to do the same thing day in, day out in a different environment, it's not going to work. Organisations, employers need to take the time to really have that empathy, as you said, with individuals to understand what their circumstances are. I did a Zoom call with someone the other day, and it was clear that they were having issues with looking after one of their children who wasn't very well. That's not the time to have it. That's not productive for anyone. And I think we need to realize, so some of the stuff that I do is I look at what should be, rather than, I used to have, I get, because as I said, because I've got some cognitive issues, I tend to have a list of what I want to do every day, what I want to accomplish. I've also got a longer term strategy. I've changed that completely into what I want to achieve over a week, because there's so much more flexibility that sits within that. And I think that's what employers need to recognise. I think the other thing that sits between that is that we'll have managers who are really struggling with all of this as well.
Yeah.
They're not in their comfort zone. The person they want to speak to isn't sat next to them. So it's how we can also support the managers around this. But the key thing that sits around is treat people as individuals, and how we communicate to people what that expectation is there. Because what we don't want is someone who's struggling, and then 3 months down the road, the employer turns back and says, but I never meant you to do all of this. But we hadn't explained to them what how the circumstances have changed.
Yeah. And I think there's also something around the empathy to realise that perhaps people in, how can I put this, maybe more junior positions don't have, or don't feel they have, the autonomy to make those sorts of decisions. So it can be very easy, I think, for senior leaders to forget what it's like not to have that autonomy, or not to feel that you can make those decisions about what you don't do and what you do, and remember to say explicitly to people, actually, you know what, we don't need that 350-page report every week. You don't have to do that. Whereas the employee is probably not going to think it's all right for them just not to do it without being told.
But we're doing some work at the moment in supporting organisations to help their strategy turn people to work after this. And one of the things we've said is, you've got to realise, what have you added to individuals' roles, and what have you taken away? So one of the things we were speaking about is, as you said, people have got increased autonomy. There's reduced bureaucracy. So we need to understand that before we then start taking that away from individuals. Or you said people will be told to do things just because we've always done it. And the 350-page report is the ideal example of that. It may be going nowhere. The person who reads it may not be in the office anymore. So organisations need to be very, very strategic to look at what their day-to-day operations are, how they affect individuals, and mostly how we can support individuals through this.
Yeah. And also, I think setting out expectations and making it clear that there may need to be core hours that are worked, but that people can do their job flexibly and at a time that works for them. Obviously, if it's a customer-facing role, that's more difficult. But if it isn't, and it can be about outcomes and outputs that mean that someone can juggle any other things they need to do in their day, but particularly for this subject, caring, homeschooling, whatever it is, but also making it clear that if somebody say it would suit somebody's working pattern actually to be answering emails very early in the morning or late at night, that doesn't then mean that other members of the team should feel compelled to respond at that time. So I think there's a lot that needs to go in around making these things explicit in communications rather than relying on people just kind of realizing it, because otherwise that can just create a different source of stress and anxiety. And you're right that lots of managers may not be coping, and lots of individuals may not be coping. And even with Zoom and Teams and video conferencing, it can be hard to spot the signs that someone isn't coping in a way that you might be able to do if you saw them face to face. So again, do you have any advice for employers around that, about what maybe to look for, or any kind of sort of warning signs that perhaps someone isn't okay?
From an employer's point of view, it's relating to what we've just spoken about. What have we put in place to have that empathy, to have that greater understanding of what those individual needs are at the moment, to better understand their position? I think if we start looking and knowing people and how they normally communicate, if they're quite a gregarious person, the types of communication they send out, if you start seeing emails from someone at 3 o'clock in the morning, for example, if you start getting lots of questions coming back to you, double checking, is this the deadline? Then you can so know that there's some issues that sit with some of this, and you've just got to keep asking. But again, I believe there's a role of an employer to support an individual to say, actually, we do have a wider plan. Actually, this is what we were going to do this. Actually, this is only temporary. Yes, we're working on it. We've got daily briefings coming out from various governments that sit around the UK. There needs to be this reassurance from employers, because it's such an uncertain time. And we do need to understand that if people are ill themselves, or a relative ills, or just as you just said, this human aspect, to be able to refocus on individuals and say, actually, it's hard enough being at the moment for some people before we start doing. And what naturally is someone's priority when it comes to their health, their children, and work? Because we know that work is always going to be the third one that sits in there. So organisations need to recognise that to be able to allow people to be the most productive within the confines of the new environment. Yes,
absolutely. And in terms of like own well-being, do you have any tips on how, well, any of us actually can help to safeguard our own well-being, but particularly if you've also got caring and other responsibilities?
Yeah, and I spend quite a bit of time reflecting. When I became disabled, so when I suffered from a brain damage, I denied it for a long period of time. And I remember I was told I had to go and see a psychotherapist as part of my rehabilitation, of which I said, I don't understand why. And he sat me down and said, if you had nothing wrong with regards to your mental health, then I would have more concerns for you after spending the last 3 years housebound and everything that you've gone through than presenting some sort of issues around anxiety. This environment will affect anybody and will affect everybody. We need to take the time to reflect and say, actually, I am under quite a bit of pressure here. Actually, I have been working X amount. I have got these extra plates which I'm trying to spin, and be able to say, well, what do I need in order to support that? So I do things which I never thought I'd do. I spend time meditating, not for long periods of time, it's just 10 minutes at a time. Breathing exercises, just taking the time to understand what sits around me and what that acceptance look like. But I think people, if you, every individual, every person is different, so it's what suits people. But there's going to be a lot of people who are just going to go head down and charge and get through the other side, and then suddenly realise what they've had to deal with. So for me, I prefer to take the time to do some more preventative measures throughout this. So then on the other side of it, then hopefully, then I can carry on as I was before.
And I think you're right that it's inherently stressful. And if we remember what must be about 7 weeks ago, I think it's the 7th week of lockdown. but there was all this advice about what to do with all this spare time you have. And of course, I say this as someone lucky enough to still be able to work, because we are still able to operate remotely. But there was this whole thing around learning a new language or whatever. And I don't know about you, Julian, but the idea of actually fitting in something like that is just kind of impossible. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that although we're not doing the commute or whatever it's inherently tiring, that doing video calls is tiring. The irony of saying this when people have voluntarily joined a webinar, obviously this webinar is the exception that proves the rule, and that there is that underlying anxiety for all of us actually, and that we shouldn't expect that we should be doing sort of superhuman things at the same time. One thing you said to me before we were chatting is about being kind to ourselves and accepting where we are, which really resonated with me.
So I've got a bit of an issue with some of the stuff that sits on social media at the moment with regards to I woke up at 5 o'clock this morning, I took my hour's exercise, which I decided to run a marathon in. I've read 15 books, I've run 15 businesses, I've started a new tech startup, I've fed the dolphins, I've learned 15 languages, I'm now practicing Tai Chi, and I'm speaking to the Dalai Lama at 4 o'clock this afternoon. There's this whole narrative that sits around there, where the person who probably put that is probably sat in his pants eating pizza somewhere. We're looking at other people for this inspiration of what's going on. And we need to understand what our individual needs are at the time. And as you said, you've just got to be kind to yourself. But there's a lot of people going, actually, I need to be doing that, because, and homeschooling is a real typical one. My 6-year-old's sitting O-levels next week, my 8-year-old's joining, sort of, we're doing this, that and the other. And it's great that it fits into that individual's environment. Doesn't fit into mine. Absolute lunacy's going on downstairs probably at the moment. But that works for us. Yeah. And why put your pressure on yourself around some of the things? I said, I spent 3 years housebound, and I look back at that time and I really regretted it, because I'd have thought I could have read every management book I wanted. I could have written every management book I wanted to write. It doesn't happen. I use an analogy. My first car was a Mini, and the boot was always full of rubbish. And one of the last cars I had was an estate car, and the boot was always full of rubbish. Whatever the size of the vessel, it'll always be with whatever you want to fill it with. So just make sure you have your priorities and what you actually need at that particular moment in time. My new boot, my boot is empty at the moment. So.
When you say boot, I think this may not be true of all women, but it makes me think of handbags. Whatever size you have, you always try and put too much in it. One thing I wanted to ask you about, Julian, so we've talked very much about your personal experience, but you're also chair of the Federation of Small Businesses, are you not? And most of our members are large businesses, but this is a webinar that's open to everybody. So I'm hoping that there will be people who are from smaller organisations, who perhaps don't have the dedicated D&I or HR type support in place. So do you have any specific advice for small businesses at this time?
So I'm the chair of the Disability, Health and Wellbeing Policy Unit for the Federation of Small Business. We know that small businesses employ more disabled people than larger organisations across the board. We know that smaller organisations can be far more adaptable, far more flexible. We know that there's a closer link with disabled individuals working in there, from business owners, from the teamwork, the communication, all across SMEs. So with regards to that, it's everything we said: help support individuals, treat people as individuals. But as an SME piece as a whole, I would say out of this conversation that SMEs are now being recognised for the value that they add to the world around us at the moment. We talked about the before we came on to do this, the local restaurant which is providing takeaways. SMEs have been an absolute key to what we're doing at the moment with regards to being able to diversify a PP, whatever it may be. And the other thing to understand from an SME's point of view is that there is quite a bit of support out there, whether it be from the government, whether it be through the FSB. And we know that this isn't going to last. So, just hats off to everyone running businesses out there. But within the context of this, you have that opportunity to have that extra flexibility and that extra level of communication and that closer communication to the people that you support and work with you.
You're on mute, Diane.
Oh, sorry. My dog was rampaging around. We're just starting a project funded by City Bridge Trust to support small businesses. And like you, have recognised that actually that flexibility to support disabled employees, but also carers, is something that probably a lot of them do naturally and immediately, but probably don't even think of it as being adjustments or flex. It's just how somebody needs to work. Let's move on and see if there are any questions from the delegates. Lucy, have you got any questions?
Hi, yeah, just to say, really interesting chat. As a parent of a 8 and a 10-year-old, it's resonating quite heavily with me, shall we say. I had an interesting question in around parents are kind of under extra pressure at the moment, and I think we've touched on that, trying to do a lot of juggling. And so should they feel under pressure to be working in their evenings when actually that would normally be their downtime? And are we just actually piling extra pressure on these parents by expecting them to fulfill the set hours they're supposed to do and fit them in at other times? What's your view on that, Julian?
If an employer is expecting you to work a 9 till 5 piece remotely from home on top of all your other responsibilities, then the answer is yes. Because there needs to be an understanding of what you're trying to deal with at this moment in time. The schools are shut. Right? We need to understand that we don't drop the kids off at the, and thank the teachers, which are all going to get a big, huge hug off me on the back of all of this. That's not reality anymore. If people are working in the evening because that's more flexible for them within their working day of what they need to achieve, absolutely fine. If they're doing it because they feel under pressure to finish a task off which has been set for them, I don't think that's realistic of an employer to do that. Obviously, there's going to be exceptions within that, something that needs to be done immediately, whatever that may be. But we do need to understand at this point of what output looks like. Output isn't a clock. Output is a task that needs to be completed within a certain time of when that needs to be then passed on to whoever. It's not the fact that, well, you're supposed to work, you're supposed to be working 39 hours this week. Yeah, fine. But let's understand what we actually need to do with regards to completing the role in your job description.
And one of the things that we talk about a lot in relation generally to talking about disability and employees feeling safe to say to their manager, actually, you know what, I have this condition and I experience these barriers and this is what I need to be able to work effectively. And we talk a lot about creating that culture that means that people feel okay to do that. And it's when they don't feel okay to do that that it tends to escalate, and then, you know, you find out you're in some sort of performance situation. It's because no one's actually known that there were barriers and people are really struggling, and actually some very simple adjustments often could make it all fine. And it strikes me that the same is probably true at the moment for people who are juggling all sorts of other responsibilities, and actually creating a culture where it's okay to say to your manager, you know what, I know I said I'd get this report to you today, but the kids are really ill, or we've had these 2 clashing therapy sessions, or whatever it is, would make a huge difference. And I really hope that some of this sort of being more human will help with that.
I've got this, one of the things that I tend to look at is what leadership looks like around inclusion, and that then goes back to treating people as individuals. But it's something I've always carried on through all of my roles, because my background is HR, is ensuring that managers understand the needs of their teams, understanding the needs of those people as individuals. And we need to understand is that you can't keep pushing people and expect them to be productive and efficient and effective in these circumstances. So again, goes back to productivity and what actually the output needs to be done, what the output looks like. Yeah,
and prioritizing that.
Yeah,
and being able to say, actually, this is the thing that's mission critical, but the rest of it, if it's a few days later, if it's a week later, or even whisper it, if it doesn't actually happen, it's not the end of the world. Have you got any other questions for us, Lucy?
So again, it's about the extra pressure, and I think this is probably a bit of a key message, and I think a lot of us who have caring responsibilities really understand. And then people see your diary looks quite free, and they book lots of back-to-back online meetings. What's your advice on managing that? I suppose maybe stand a few people up, but I think generally, I think people even without caring responsibilities, they're finding this, that their diary is back-to-back because they see they're available, and actually you need a breather in between these things, don't you?
Yeah. So on a practical session, see if you can actually put something else in your diary. I've used this adage time and time again. I work for a large retail organisation, and we had a global organisation. And I walked past the CEO's office, and he had his feet up on the desk, and I'd gone to a meeting, and I came back, and I went to another meeting, and I came back, and I went to lunch, and I came back, and he was still sat there with his feet on the desk. So I knocked on the door, and I said, "Bill, is everything all right?" And he just turned around to me, just went, "Strategy, sunshine. I'm doing strategy." He'd taken that time out to think about what things were going on. And this is a fantastic opportunity within all of this to be able to have more time to ourselves to try and ascertain tasks and what we need to do, and do this work around prioritizing. Where other people are filling, and you have this within senior management as well, where people just will continually fill your time if you let them. And there has to be some sort of pushback to say, actually, I'm now working more flexibly. So fine, you can put me on any time that you want, but stick it in 11 o'clock at night. And let's see how many people want to sit on a Zoom meeting at 11 o'clock at night, for example. I know I'm being facetious, but there has to be an element of no, because I'm now in a position of remote working. I'm also in a position of having to self-manage my day. And again, what are the outputs of those meetings going to be? Are those necessary? Do they have to take place on that day for those outcomes to be used immediately? And I suppose but the challenge that sits within all that is the ability to go back and push back on some of those things.
I was just reflecting, I used to work with this fantastic facilitator years and years ago, who used to say diaries are a repository of other people's priorities, which I really, really liked. And I think that practical thing, Julian, about blocking out time is really important. I also know I can be the worst at it, because I'll block out time, then if somebody wants to talk to me, then I will give up that block time. And actually that's not really good for anybody, really, because if you end up with the back-to-back stuff, there is no breathing time and there is no thinking time or creative time. I mean, I'm not sure I would want to spend my whole day with my feet on my desk and what sort of message that might give out. But then, Julian, you have got your new Mickey Mouse trainers, so
that's true.
Be a good way to show them off. But yeah, recognizing that work is not just meetings, and having a break is really important. And one thing that took me aback a couple of weeks ago is my partner said to me, "How on earth did you find time to ring me?" And I thought about it, and I thought, well, it's because I used to have gaps between meetings when I was, say, walking from one place to the next, and I'd be going on the road and I'd give him a ring, or I'd have 15 minutes when I was early for my next meeting and I'd go and have a cup of coffee. And of course, when we're all sat in front of our PCs all the time, you don't have that. So you need to do that. And I think it's part of being kind to ourselves to do that, and recognizing it's important as well.
Just one more actually as well. So more of a comment than a question, really. I think it also is a comment here about how actually it's been really interesting to build relationships with people a little more and get to know them a little better, and some of their family members through this, and how that's actually been quite positive. It's not unusual for me to have a child suddenly appear and go, "Excuse me, where's my apple? It's snack time," kind of thing. And I think that's been interesting as well. So I say more of a comment. But
I think it's, again, through some of the work that we're doing, looking at supporting organisations to allow them for staff to return to work. One of the benefits that we're looking at is this increased communication across organisations, where organisations I was talking to, regards to some divisional divides just because of geography no longer exist, and it's how you capture that. And just to go back with regards to the analogy of the CEO, I think one of the key things within this is that we can operate in a different way, which allows us to think rather than just do, to actually implement planning time. across some of the things we are, rather than what we may have in the traditional working environment, which go straight into a meeting, straight out of a meeting, straight into it. So where we can actually take that time and say, right, I now plan and understand what we are going to use with these outputs, what we want to put into it. So it's, I think it's key regards to the different things that will be opened up. But on the other side of things, again, I was talking yesterday with some of this bureaucracy which we mentioned. What happens when that starts creeping back? So if someone from the accounts tells you suddenly started using too many pens, or your stationery budget, which is something that seems so trivial at the moment, which will then come back to commonplace working practices, is understanding the impact of that as well.
Yeah, and I think it'd be really important. I've seen this in a few places, and we've been doing it in our own organisation, is thinking about when this ends, what will we be glad to see the back of? Possibly some online meetings, but actually what do we want to keep, and how can we hang on to those really good things? And ironically, I think probably our team at BDF, which is only 30 odd people, so it's quite easy for us, is probably better connected now working remotely than we were before, because we now have very, very regular team catch-ups on a whole range of topics that actually get people together in a much more regular way than we would have done. So although people were all present in the office, those that were there actually wasn't that same level of sharing and knowing each other. So making sure we hang on to that, and that humanity thing, I think is really important. So Julian, obviously there are negatives, but there are positives, and we've touched on this a little bit, but what would you hope to see as a legacy from this period? What would you like us to hang on to when things return to normal? And I'm deliberately doing that in inverted commas.
And I think you just mentioned it, that if everyone's putting into practice what we've spoken about over the last half hour or so, that taking time to treat people as individuals, to finding out what is going on outside of the workplace, what extra responsibilities they have, what people are dealing with. It would be a tragedy if the doors of offices open up and we go back and ignore all that again. We ignore that other side of things. So I think it's key that we have that treating people as individuals to take forward. I think the accessibility, the flexibility, and the opportunities that presents around disability has to be taken forward, but not just disability, across the wider piece of more flexible working. And I think what we need to recognise is that there'll be people struggling through this, there'll be people muddling through, there will be people excelling within all of this. I spoke to someone the other day, and they were saying that the CEO's executive assistant loved working from home because wasn't interrupted every 3 minutes and could get everything they wanted to be done. And there's also people which will excel within this, who will be acting up within different roles, and we'll all be learning a whole new set of skills. And that's what we need to recognise. And certainly, again, linking back to disability, where we look at these new skill sets, well, if we are looking at remote working or working from home, or we now need to apply that to what could you said, the new work normal, I call it work versus version 2.2, then that should be part of our recruitment strategies. We now need to start looking at different competence behaviours in individuals. And again, that's much more inclusive. So that's where the opportunities sit behind me. And also, after all of this happens, we need to celebrate the successes. We need to celebrate individuals. We need to celebrate what organisations have achieved. And as a nation as a whole of how we've all got through this. And we need to recognise this hasn't been an easy period for us all, that there have been challenges, but the opportunities to take things forward and learn from it. Yes,
absolutely. And I think when we were talking before, you made a really good point around introverts maybe thriving in this environment rather than extroverts, who more typically thrive in that face-to-face, sort of much more out there, quite literally, form of business, and making sure that we don't lose that, and that we continue to play to different strengths and preferences. I had a really funny conversation with somebody the other day, someone who has autism, who said that they'd basically been working from home for years, and that now suddenly everybody wanted to get in contact and just say, how are you doing? And he said, well, I was fine before, I'm still fine. I don't need this check up all the time. So it was an interesting kind of thought, really. If there aren't any other questions, I will move on and just remind you of some of the other support that we've got available. So if you are a member of BDF, and at this point I wouldn't be doing my job if I said, if not, why not? Please join us. Please do remember that we have an advice service which is open to any manager in your organisation if you're a member or partner. So it's not just restricted to the key contact or the D&I or HR lead who has it. So anyone can call us or email us. They are very experienced, can answer a whole load of queries on, well, pretty much anything you can think of and more besides. So please do use us. There is also a whole lot of learning and development resources, consultancy, networks and task forces, which are of course virtual at the moment. So do have a look on our website because there's tons there that we hope will help you. And this webinar was brought to you as part of our COVID-19 series, which is running at least until the end of May, every Thursday morning. So massive thank you to my guest today, Julian John. Always a joy to chat with you, Julian. And next week's webinar will be hosted by our task force manager, Lucy Ruck, who is much better at this than I am. And Lucy will be joined by two guests next week, Joanna Wotton and Orla Pearson from My Clear Text, who will be talking about how to make virtual meetings and communications accessible and inclusive to deaf and hard of hearing colleagues, particularly when working remotely. So if it's not up already, the link to book into that will shortly be available on our website, and the recording from this webinar will also be available to download shortly as part of our COVID-19 toolkit that's free to everyone. So if you found it useful, please have a look, please tell others, please share it. And until the next time, look after yourselves, be kind to yourselves, and take care.